I was sitting beside my dad at Christmas dinner cutting into my ham when my phone buzzed under the table. A message lit up the screen. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. My heart skipped. I looked up. My stepmom was staring straight at me, her smile sharp, almost daring me to disobey. I excused myself, my legs trembling as I walked out of that warm, glowing room into the cold, night air. What I found waiting outside destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family and turned my world upside down. The knife slid through the slice of Christmas ham on my plate, the scent of cloves and honey rising into the air, and for a fleeting moment I tried to anchor myself in that simple act of eating. Around me, the dining room shimmered with the warmth of the chandelier overhead, the soft glow of candles flickering against polished silverware, and the faint sounds of carols playing from the old radio that Dad kept in the corner. He liked tradition, or at least he liked to pretend he did, though so much about him felt like performance these days. I sat to his right, close enough to hear the low rumble of his laugh as he told yet another story about a deal he had closed years ago, how he had secured millions for the company by standing his ground at the perfect moment. He spoke with pride, his voice booming and sure, and I could see the admiration in my half-sister Grace's eyes as she leaned toward him. She was only 23, still young enough to soak in every word like scripture. Linda, my stepmother, sat directly across from me. At 45, she carried herself with a grace that felt studied. Her red lips curved into a smile that looked painted on rather than born of any true joy. She watched him as he spoke, nodding at all the right places, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch his wrist in support. To anyone else, she would have looked like the perfect wife, elegant and poised. To me, she looked like a shadow sitting in my mother's chair. The table was immaculate, linen napkins folded into neat triangles, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, a centerpiece of pine branches and cranberries arranged with care. Every detail screamed of Linda's touch. Dad never cared about such things when Mom was alive. Back then, we ate on mismatched plates, the napkins often just paper from the grocery store, but there had been laughter that spilled into the night. As I lifted a forkful of ham to my mouth, my phone buzzed softly against my leg. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe a holiday greeting from an old friend, but the vibration came again insistent. I slid my hand down, careful not to draw attention, and glanced at the screen hidden beneath the tablecloth. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. The words burned into my eyes. My heart thudded once hard enough to shake me. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting, my breath catching. It made no sense. Who would send this? Why now? I read it again and again, hoping the meaning would change, but the letter stayed the same. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. I forced myself to lift my head, my body stiff, and that was when I saw Linda. Her gaze was locked on me, sharp and unblinking. She smiled just slightly, as though she had been waiting for me to look up. The fork in my hand slipped clattering against the porcelain plate, drawing Grace's attention. "You okay?" she asked, softly tilting her head. I nodded too quickly. "Just tired," I murmured, forcing a smile that felt like glass cracking. Dad laughed at his own story, oblivious, lifting his glass of red wine in triumph as he mimicked the moment he had signed the papers that sealed his victory years ago. His face flushed with pride, his eyes alive with memory. The message seared through me. I could not sit there any longer. My pulse hammered in my ears, my chest tightened. I pushed back my chair, the scrape against the hardwood sounding louder than it should have. Dad waved me off when I muttered about needing some air. Barely looking up from his story, Grace returned to her phone. But Linda never stopped watching me. I pulled on my coat in the hallway, my fingers fumbling with the sleeves. The hum of the house wrapped around me, the faint tick of the old clock in the living room marking each second like a drumbeat. When I opened the front door, the cold rushed in, cutting my face and filling my lungs with sharpness. The snow outside glowed under the streetlights, each flake drifting like ash. I stepped onto the porch, my boots crunching against the thin crust of ice on the steps. The air was silent except for the distant rustle of wind through bare branches. I took a few steps down the driveway, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, and then I saw him. A figure stood near Dad's car, half shrouded in shadow, tall shoulders broad under a heavy coat, a hood pulled low. My breath fogged in the air as I froze, every muscle in my body taut with fear and curiosity. The figure moved closer. I could hear the snow crunching beneath his boots. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I could not look away. When he reached me, he did not speak. He simply extended a gloved hand, an envelope pinched between his fingers. I hesitated, my heart racing. My instincts screamed to run, to turn back into the warmth of the house, but something stronger rooted me in place. I reached out slowly, my bare hand brushing the cold leather of his glove as I took the envelope. The paper felt heavy, almost damp from the frost in the air. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his form fading into the night until he vanished completely. I looked down at the envelope. My name was scrawled across it in black ink. Selena. Nothing more. The letters were jagged, rushed, almost desperate. My hands shook as I tore it open. The rip of paper seemed too loud in the frozen silence. Inside was a stack of photocopied pages. The top one bore the seal of the Chicago Police Department. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the date printed across the top. December 2015, the night my mother died. The pages blurred as tears filled my eyes. I flipped through them quickly, my hands trembling. The accident report, witness statements, photographs of the crash. But things were wrong. Whole sections were blacked out, names missing, sentences crossed out and replaced. Handwritten notes in the margins pointed to inconsistencies, to contradictions, to questions never answered. In one corner, scrawled in bold letters, was a single word: manipulated. I staggered back against the car, the cold seeping into my spine. My breath came in short gasps, clouding the air. My mother's face filled my memory. Her voice, the way she hummed softly when she cooked, the way she squeezed my hand when she wanted me to know she was proud. I was 19 when she died. 19 and naive enough to believe the story they told me, that the ice on the roads had taken her too soon. Now the paper in my hand told me otherwise. I clutched the envelope to my chest, the edges cutting into my fingers, and stumbled back toward the porch. The warmth of the house spilled through the open door, laughter rising faintly from the dining room as though the world inside had not changed, but mine had. I leaned against the doorframe, the cold clinging to me like a second skin. Whoever had sent this wanted me to know the truth. But the truth was jagged, dangerous, and it pointed straight at the people sitting at that table. Dad, Linda, the family I was supposed to trust. I pressed the papers closer, as if holding them tighter might steady the shaking in my hands. The snow swirled around me, the flakes settling on my lashes, melting into tears that burned my cheeks. I whispered under my breath, "Mom, if you can hear me, I will not let this rest." I turned the knob and stepped back inside. The warmth wrapped around me, the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon, the sound of Dad's laughter carrying through the halls. I slipped out of my coat, smoothed my hair, and forced my face into calm. When I entered the dining room again, Dad was lifting his glass in mid-toast, his smile wide, his eyes shining. Grace clapped her hands together, laughing. Linda's gaze snapped to mine, steady and unyielding. And in my pocket, the envelope whispered like a living thing, the truth beating against me with every step I took. I barely slept. Even when I finally closed my eyes after slipping the envelope back into the drawer of my nightstand, my mind refused to rest. Every time I drifted near sleep, the papers rose up in the darkness, the blacked-out lines glaring the word manipulated written in a jagged scrawl. I could still hear the faint hum of the heater, the creaks of the old house in the winter air, but they only made the silence sharper. By the time the first gray light seeped through my curtains, I felt hollowed out as if I had been awake for days. I sat on the edge of the bed, the wooden floor cold against my bare feet. My body ached with exhaustion, yet my nerves buzzed like live wires. Downstairs, I could hear the clatter of pans, the faint rise of Linda's voice, smooth and cheerful, greeting the day as if nothing in the world could trouble her. Dad's laughter followed, deep and rumbling, steady as ever. The same laugh that once anchored me now sounded foreign, too full, almost rehearsed. I pulled the envelope out again and spread the papers across my quilt. They looked worse in the daylight. The ink seemed faded, but sinister, the gaps more obvious, the notes more accusing. My eyes blurred as I tried to make sense of the patterns, the contradictions, the names that vanished between one page and the next. I could not do this alone. I needed someone who could see what I could not. I reached for my phone, my hand trembling as I scrolled to Sarah's number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but groggy. "Selena," she murmured. "Are you okay?" I tried to steady my voice. "I need to see you. Today." She did not ask questions. She never did when I sounded like that. She simply said she would meet me. We chose a coffee shop near her apartment on Michigan Avenue, a place we used to study together years ago. I dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a thick sweater, tugging boots over my socks. My coat felt heavier than usual, though maybe it was just me carrying the weight of what I held pressed against my ribs. I slipped out of the house quietly, hoping no one would notice. The December air bit at my cheeks as soon as I stepped outside, the snow crunching under my feet as I hurried down the walk. The city moved around me in a blur. Cars hissed over slush. People bustled past with scarves pulled high and shopping bags bumping against their legs. Christmas lights blinked from every store window, cheerful and mocking. I clutched the envelope under my arm, every step driven by the need to put this in front of someone who would know what to do. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. The heat fogged the windows, and for a moment I stood there breathing it in, trying to find my footing. Sarah waved from a booth near the back, her brown hair tucked into a messy bun, her eyes sharper than her soft smile. I slid into the seat across from her, and the moment she saw my face, her expression shifted. She reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. "Tell me," she said. I pulled the envelope from my coat and laid the papers out on the table. She leaned forward, her lawyer's gaze scanning the pages with precision. She traced the lines with her fingertip, her brow furrowing as she read. She flipped back and forth between pages, her lips pressing tighter. "This is wrong," she said finally, her voice low. "These reports are incomplete. Look at this." The same witness gives 2 accounts, one of them shorter, one longer. But the names don't match. This page says the road was salted, this one says it wasn't. And here the officer's badge number is missing. That doesn't happen by accident. I stared at her, my throat dry. So it was true. Sarah met my eyes. "Whoever gave you this wanted you to see what was buried. This wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the record." My breath shuddered out of me. I had spent 8 years carrying the hollow ache of loss, half believing and half doubting the official story, and now the doubt was spreading like poison. "What do I do?" I whispered. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "First, you have to be careful. If someone slipped this to you, it means they are watching. And if Linda looked at you the way you described last night, she may already suspect you know something." My phone buzzed against the table. I flinched. Sarah's gaze darted to it. I turned it over slowly, dread curling in my gut. Another message glowed on the screen. "They're lying to you. Don't trust your dad." The words blurred, sinking into me with the weight of iron. My chest tightened. I felt the walls of the coffee shop close in, the hum of voices around us fading. Sarah reached for my hand again, gripping hard. "This isn't random, Selena. Whoever is doing this wants you to question him." I thought of Dad's laughter echoing in the dining room, the way he lifted his glass in a toast, proud and certain. I thought of his hand on my shoulder when I was little, the way he used to carry me to bed when I fell asleep on the couch. And I thought of my mother, her car crumpled against a tree, her voice silenced. Could he have known? Could he have helped cover it? The thought made me sick. Sarah's voice cut through. "You cannot show him this. You cannot show Linda, not until we know more. If this is real, they will do anything to keep it hidden." I nodded slowly, though my insides twisted. Every part of me wanted to confront him, to scream the truth in his face, but I knew she was right. We sat in silence for a while. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the espresso machine, the muffled conversations around us became distant noise. My phone still lay on the table, the message glaring up at me like a wound. I whispered, "If he was part of this, how will I ever look at him again?" Sarah's eyes softened. "One step at a time," she said gently. When I finally stepped back into the cold, the wind cut against my skin, sharper now. I wandered the streets past holiday shoppers and glowing lights, my thoughts churning. I kept seeing Linda's smile across the table, the way her eyes had pierced mine. I kept hearing Dad's laugh, now hollow, now suspect. By the time I returned to the house, night had fallen. The windows glowed with warmth, but the sight made my stomach twist. I opened the door, and Linda stood there, elegant as always, her perfume sweet and heavy. She kissed my cheek, her lips cool. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice casual, but her eyes searching. "Just walking," I said. "I needed some air." She lingered a second too long before turning away. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said over her shoulder. I climbed the stairs to my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on the bed staring at my phone. The message still glowed in my mind. "They're lying to you. Don't trust your dad." I pressed my hands to my face, whispering into the quiet that I would not let this go. Whatever truth they had buried, I would dig it out no matter what it cost me. The next evening came too quickly, as though time itself wanted to trap me back at that table before I had the chance to breathe. I felt heavy walking down the stairs, my hand brushing along the banister, the wood polished to a shine that reminded me of 100 childhood mornings, when I had raced down too fast, Mom's voice calling after me. Now the sound of voices drifted upward from the dining room, warm and cheerful on the surface, yet to me they carried a chill. The dining room looked just as it had the night before. The chandelier glowed, the candles flickered, the silver gleamed. Linda had arranged it all again with her meticulous care, not a fork out of place. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes floated through the air. Grace was already seated, her phone in her hand, laughing softly at something on the screen. Dad sat at the head of the table, his shoulders square, his face bright with pride as he poured himself a glass of wine. I took my seat beside him, sliding into the chair as quietly as I could, hoping no one would see how tightly I clenched my hands under the table. I felt as though my skin barely contained me, my chest too full of questions, and the secret that pulsed like fire in the drawer upstairs. Dad launched into another story, one of his favorite kinds, about how he had closed a deal in the 90s when he was still building his empire. His voice carried through the room, rich and booming, his gestures wide. Grace looked at him with open admiration, nodding at every detail, smiling at the right moments. She still believed in him still. I used to. Linda reached for the breadbasket, her manicured fingers graceful as she passed it to me. Her eyes lingered as our hands brushed her smile sharp and knowing. She settled back into her chair, sipping from her glass, her gaze traveling across the table like a cat watching prey. I speared a piece of chicken and lifted it to my mouth, chewing mechanically, though I could hardly taste it. My phone felt like it burned in my pocket. My mind flashed back to Sarah's warning, to the message that still haunted me. "They're lying to you, don't trust your dad." Dad leaned back, laughing at the end of his own story. He slapped the table lightly, the sound echoing. Grace clapped her hands together. The scene would have looked perfect to anyone walking in a family celebrating, but I felt like I was caught in a play I did not believe in anymore. Linda set her glass down gently and said, her voice sweet, "The weather is brutal this year. It reminds me of that winter so many years ago. Do you remember, Richard? When the roads iced over and we almost lost control driving home." My fork slipped clinking against the plate. My breath caught. Dad chuckled, nodding. "Oh yes, I remember that. We skidded a little, but I handled it." Linda's eyes never left mine. Her smile curved just slightly. "That was the same winter your mother had her accident, wasn't it, Selena?" The words struck like a blade. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. My throat tightened and my palms grew damp. She had not been part of this family then. She had no reason to remember. And yet here she was, placing the memory like a stone in my path, forcing me to stumble over it. Grace looked up from her phone, frowning a little. "What an accident." Dad spoke quickly, almost too quickly. "Your mother's accident, sweetheart. Before Linda was with us. The roads were bad." Grace nodded, her eyes soft, and turned back to her phone. I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile. "Yes," I whispered. "That winter." Linda tilted her head slightly, sipping again from her glass, her gaze fixed on me as if she were testing the strength of my mask. The rest of the meal blurred. Dad began another story, his voice a steady hum in my ears, though I could barely follow the words. My eyes remained fixed on my plate, my food untouched. My hands trembled under the table, hidden in the folds of my napkin. Grace nudged me gently with her elbow. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded quickly, too quickly, just tired. Linda's smile deepened, though her eyes remained cold. Dad raised his glass again in another toast, this one to family, to health, to a prosperous new year ahead. Grace lifted her water, smiling, and Linda clinked glasses with him. I lifted mine too, the stem slippery against my fingers, the glass heavy with unspoken words. When the toast ended, I excused myself. My chair scraped across the floor loud enough to draw a glance from Dad. He waved a hand, telling me to rest if I needed to. Grace shrugged and returned to her screen. But Linda's gaze followed me all the way to the door. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. My heart pounded as if I had just run a mile. Inside my room, I locked the door and leaned against it, my breath rushing out in ragged bursts. Her words replayed again and again. That winter, that accident. I paced across the room, my hands pressed against my head. Maybe she had read the reports, maybe Dad had told her, or maybe she knew more than either of them had ever admitted. I opened the drawer and pulled the envelope out again. The papers spread across my bed looked as haunting as ever. The dates, the contradictions, the notes in the margins, and now Linda's words stitched themselves to the pages, as though she were part of the ink. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching one of the pages in my hands until it crumpled. My throat burned. My mother's face rose in my mind again, her soft smile, the way she had braided my hair the morning before she died. The sound of her humming while she cooked filled my ears until I could barely breathe. Downstairs, the faint sound of laughter rose again, muffled through the walls. Steady and confident, Dad's laugh, Linda's smooth voice, Grace's bright notes. They lived as though everything was fine. But it wasn't. It had never been. I pressed my forehead into my hands, whispering to myself that I would not let this go. Linda wanted me rattled, afraid, unsure. She had drawn blood tonight, but she would not win. Not in the end. I stepped out onto the balcony that night, desperate for air that did not taste like secrets. The dining room still glowed behind me, the sound of clinking glasses and muffled laughter seeping through the closed doors. My breath hung in the cold, each exhale drifting upward into the December night. The city stretched in the distance, its skyline sharp against the sky, but here on the edge of my father's house, all I could hear was the pounding of my own pulse. The snow had slowed to a dusting flakes, landing softly on my coat, melting as quickly as they touched. I gripped the railing, trying to steady myself. My chest felt hollow, my body tired from carrying questions that multiplied faster than I could answer them. The papers in my drawer, the messages on my phone, Linda's pointed words at the dinner table, each piece pressed against me, heavy and unforgiving. A sound behind me made me turn. The balcony door eased open and a figure stepped out. For a moment, my stomach dropped, thinking it was Linda, ready to corner me in the cold. But then I saw his face, Ethan Cole. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. His face was older than the last time I had seen it, sharper, but still undeniably his. He had been my friend since childhood. The boy who had lived 3 houses down from us on Oak Street. The boy who had sat beside me on the school bus. The boy who had whispered dreams to me under the bleachers. He had vanished after college, swept into the world of business and ambition, leaving only scattered traces I had caught online in headlines about a rising tech company and millions of dollars raised. And now here he was, standing on my dad's balcony, his eyes fixed on me. "Selena," he said, his voice low, steady. My throat tightened. "Ethan." I did not know whether to step forward or back. My heart raced in confusion. He had been gone so long, and the timing of his return here now felt too deliberate. He looked at me with a mixture of caution and certainty, as though he had rehearsed this moment. "I thought you might be out here," he said. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my words sharper than I intended. He glanced back through the glass doors at the glow of the dining room. "Your dad invited me. Business mostly. Old connections. But that's not the reason I wanted to see you." I frowned, suspicion curling through me. "What reason, then?" He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. The glow of the screen lit his face briefly as he scrolled, then he held it out to me. On the screen was a copy of the same police report I had in my drawer, blacked out lines and all. My blood ran cold. "It was you," I whispered. "You sent this to me." He nodded. "I had to." My knees weakened and I gripped the railing harder. "Why? Why now?" Because he said quietly, "It has gone on long enough. Your mother's death was not an accident. I have proof, Selena. More than what you've seen." The snow swirled gently between us, but the air felt electric, charged with a truth I had both feared and longed to hear. I shook my head, my eyes burning. "How do you know?" He leaned closer, his breath visible in the cold. "I dug into records when I started building my company. I had to learn the game, how people with power cover their tracks. I found things tied to your family, things I couldn't ignore. And when I saw Linda tonight, the way she looked at you, I knew I couldn't wait any longer." I stared at him, my chest rising and falling too fast. The years fell away in an instant, back to when we were 16, when he had pressed his hand against mine at the county fair and promised we would always tell each other the truth. Now he was keeping that promise, even after all the silence. "Do you know what you're saying?" I whispered. "If this is true, it means Dad—" He placed a hand on the railing near mine, his eyes steady. "It means they both had a hand in it." My breath hitched. Before I could speak again, the balcony door slid open. I froze. Dad stepped out, a smile still on his face from the warmth of the dining room, his glass of wine in hand. He looked between us, his brows lifting slightly. "Everything's all right out here?" he asked. My throat closed. I forced a smile, shaking my head lightly. "Just catching up," I said. "Ethan and I go way back." Dad clapped Ethan on the shoulder, his laugh booming. Yes, I remember. The Cole boy from Oak Street. "Good to see you again." Ethan smiled politely, slipping his phone back into his coat pocket before Dad could notice. His voice was calm, but I caught the tension in his jaw. "Always a pleasure, sir." Dad raised his glass. "Come back inside, both of you. It's too cold out here." He turned and walked back into the glow of the dining room, oblivious. I exhaled shakily, my body trembling with the weight of what had just been said, of what had almost been discovered. Ethan's eyes met mine, serious, urgent. "We cannot talk here," he whispered. "Find me tomorrow." I nodded faintly, my voice lost in the swirl of snow and secrets. I woke up the next morning with the taste of metal in my mouth, the bitter hangover of secrets instead of wine. My dreams had been tangled with images of Ethan's face, the way his eyes had carried both urgency and something gentler, a shadow of the boy I had once known. I had not slept more than a few hours, and when I looked in the mirror, the dark circles under my eyes told the truth I could not hide. Downstairs, I could hear the clatter of dishes. Linda's voice floating upward, smooth and pleasant as she prepared breakfast. Grace's laughter chimed in young and bright, as though nothing in this house was broken. I pulled on my sweater, tied my hair back, and forced myself into the hallway, each step heavy with the decision I knew I had to make. I could not keep carrying this truth alone. I needed to know if Grace, young as she was, could see what I saw, or if Linda already had her wrapped so tightly in her grasp that no daylight could reach her. She was in the living room, curled on the sofa with a textbook open on her lap, her phone buzzing beside her. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a soft glow on her hair. She looked up when I walked in, her smile quick, genuine. "Hey," she said, "you look tired." I sat down across from her, my hands clasped together in my lap. I didn't sleep much, I admitted. Then I hesitated, my throat tightening. "Grace, can I ask you something?" Her smile faltered. "Sure. Do you ever feel like things in this house aren't what they seem?" She frowned, her fingers tracing the edge of her textbook. "What do you mean?" I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "I mean with Dad, with Linda. Do you ever feel like there are things they aren't telling us?" Her eyes darted toward the kitchen where Linda's voice drifted in and out. She lowered her voice. "Sometimes." She paused, biting her lip. "But Linda helps me so much. My tuition, my books, even the rent for my apartment. I don't want to sound ungrateful." I leaned forward, my chest tightening. "Grace, that's exactly it. She uses those things to keep you tied to her. Don't you see?" Her face shifted, her brow furrowing. "That's not fair," she whispered. "She has been good to me. She supports me when I need it." I wanted to shake her, to shout, but I forced myself to stay calm. "She supports you because it gives her control. If you depended on yourself, you wouldn't need her." Her eyes glistened. "Selena, why are you saying this?" "Because I know things," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Things about Mom's death. The air was still between us." Grace's mouth parted slightly, confusion and fear flashing across her face. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, a shadow moved in the doorway. Linda stepped into the room, her smile as sharp as glass. "What a serious conversation," she said smoothly. Grace straightened quickly, her cheeks flushing. "We were just talking," she said, closing her textbook. Linda walked closer, her heels clicking softly on the floor. Her perfume filled the air, heavy and floral, pressing against my throat. She touched Grace's hair gently, tucking it behind her ear. Her eyes locked on mine. "That's nice," she said. "Sisters should talk." Her hand lingered on Grace's shoulder, possessive. Then she tilted her head, her smile curving just slightly. "But remember, my dear, some conversations can do more harm than good." Grace looked down, her shoulders stiff under Linda's touch. I clenched my hands into fists, forcing myself not to lash out. Linda's gaze pierced mine, daring me to speak, to reveal what I carried. I swallowed the words, burning in my throat, my silence tasting like defeat. After a moment, Linda turned away, her voice cheerful again. "Breakfast is ready," she said, gliding back toward the kitchen. Grace rose quickly, gathering her books, her face carefully blank. She didn't look at me as she walked out. I sat there alone, my chest heavy, my hands trembling. She had heard me, maybe even believed me for a flicker of a second. But Linda's grip was too tight. I needed space, needed air. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the front door, the cold morning air biting into my cheeks. The city seemed quieter than usual, the snow muffling the sounds of traffic, the sky pale and flat. My boots crunched against the frozen sidewalk as I walked, not knowing where I was going until I found myself at the edge of Evanston, near the old house where I had grown up with Mom. It stood on a quiet street, the paint peeling, now the shutters crooked. The yard that had once been filled with daisies she planted every spring was bare, the earth frozen. I walked up the path slowly, memories flooding me. I could hear her voice, smell the spaghetti sauce she used to simmer on Sundays, feel the warmth of her arms. A figure stood by the gate, an older man, his shoulders slightly stooped, his face weathered. When he turned, recognition jolted through me. Robert Harris, a friend of my mother's, a journalist who had visited often when I was a child. "Selena," he said softly. I blinked back, tears. "I didn't know if you would still be here." He nodded, his eyes kind but shadowed. I never stopped coming back. We went inside together, the old boards creaking under our feet. The house smelled of dust and memory, faintly of wood smoke. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped, his gaze heavy. "I know why you're here," he said. I swallowed hard. "Do you?" He nodded slowly. "I tried to investigate back then. Your mother's accident. I knew things didn't add up, but I stopped, blocked at every turn. Records sealed, people silenced." My hands shook against the table. "Who stopped you?" His eyes darkened. "People with power, people your dad knew." "And Linda?" She had ties I could never quite prove, but she was close to a detective. "Miller." That name kept coming up. My stomach twisted. Linda. Of course. Robert reached across the table, his hand rough but steady on mine. Be careful, Selena. They don't want the truth to come out. Before I could speak, headlights flared through the dusty curtains. A car idled outside its engine, low menacing. My breath caught. They're watching you already, Robert said grimly. I stood slowly, my body trembling, the shadows of the past pressing close. When I returned to the house in Chicago that evening, the glow of its windows felt more like watchful eyes than warmth. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a long moment, my breath rising in faint clouds before I forced myself inside. The front door closed behind me with a sound that echoed in my chest. Linda's laughter floated from the dining room, graceful and deliberate, and Dad's voice rumbled in response. Grace's lighter tone chimed in, but even her laughter sounded strained to me now, as if it had been rehearsed. I climbed the stairs quietly, hoping to disappear into my room before anyone noticed. But halfway up, I heard Grace's voice calling, "Selena, wait!" I turned. She stood at the base of the stairs, a textbook pressed against her chest. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, as though she had been waiting for me all evening. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded, gesturing toward my room. She followed me up, her footsteps hesitant, and when we entered, I closed the door behind us. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her book, while I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "What's wrong?" I asked gently. She looked down at her lap, her voice small. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday. About Mom. About secrets." My heart tightened. "Grace," I began, then stopped. I could see how frightened she was. She was caught between wanting to know and wanting to stay safe in the world Linda had built around her. I moved closer, kneeling so I could see her face. "Grace, you deserve the truth. Mom's death was not what they told us. There are records, evidence, things that prove it was covered up." Her eyes snapped up to mine, her mouth trembling. "Do you mean Dad?" I hesitated, my throat burning. "I don't know everything yet, but I know enough to say he isn't innocent. And Linda, she's not just a bystander. She's part of this too." Grace's hands tightened on her book until her knuckles turned white. "That can't be true," she whispered. "Linda has been there for me. She pays my tuition. She makes sure I have what I need. That's how she keeps you tied to her," I said softly, "by making you believe you can't live without her help." Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head. "I don't know what to believe." I took her hands in mine, steadying them. "Believe in yourself. Not in the version of family they want you to accept." Before she could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Then it opened without waiting for permission. Linda stood there, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked smoothly. Grace jumped, pulling her hands away from mine. "Nothing," she said quickly, her voice too high. "Just school." Linda stepped inside her heels, silent on the carpet. She moved to Grace's side and rested a hand on her shoulder, possessive. "School is important," she said. "And so is family. Isn't that right, Selena?" Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to contradict her. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to nod. "Yes, family." Linda's smile widened slightly, though her grip on Grace's shoulder remained firm. "Good. Then let's make sure we don't fill our heads with nonsense." Grace looked down, her face pale. Linda kissed her temple, then straightened, her perfume heavy in the small room. "Sleep well," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, and then she left, closing the door with a soft click. Grace exhaled shakily, tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked at me helpless. "See," she whispered, "she's always there." I hugged her tightly, feeling how thin her frame was under my arms. "We'll find a way out," I murmured. "But you have to trust me." She nodded faintly, though I could see doubt clouding her eyes. Later that night, I sat by my window, watching the snow drift under the streetlight. A black car idled at the curb, its engine faint but unmistakable. I pulled the curtain tighter, unease crawling along my skin. They were watching. Maybe Linda had arranged it, maybe Dad had. Either way, it meant time was running out. The next morning, I found Grace in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug. Her eyes were rimmed red, but she tried to smile. "I have class," she said. I touched her arm gently. "Be careful. And remember what I told you." She nodded quickly, glancing over her shoulder. Linda was already at the stove, humming softly, her movements elegant, practiced. She turned just enough to catch my eye, her smile knowing. I left the kitchen before the weight of her gaze crushed me. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I went through the motions, but every moment was haunted by the memory of Grace's tearful face, Linda's possessive hand, the car idling outside, secrets pressed tighter against me, and I knew the walls of this house were closing in. That night when I tried to sleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside my door long enough for me to hold my breath. Then they moved on. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself that I would survive this, that I would not let them destroy me the way they had destroyed my mother. The morning after Linda's quiet intrusion into my room left me restless. I woke with the feeling that the walls themselves were closing in, that every shadow carried her perfume, and every creak of the floor was her heel pressing closer. The house felt suffocating, and I knew if I stayed any longer without answers, I would lose myself to suspicion. Sarah was the only person I trusted with what I had. I called her before breakfast, my voice low, asking her to meet me in her office. She didn't hesitate. By mid-morning, I was on the train to downtown, the rhythm of the tracks steady under my boots as I stared at the frozen city rushing by. Chicago in winter has a way of muting everything, coating it in ice, disguising what lies underneath. When I stepped into Sarah's office, she was already at her desk, files spread in front of her. She looked up, her brow furrowing as she saw the exhaustion on my face. "Selena," she said, "sit." I dropped into the chair across from her and slid the folder of photocopied reports across the desk. She opened it, scanning the pages again. "I need you to help me trace the money," I said. "If this was covered up, there has to be a trail." She nodded her fingers, moving quickly across her laptop. She pulled up bank records, real estate files, documents she had access to through her firm. Hours passed as she cross-referenced dates and transactions. I watched as lines of numbers and codes flickered across the screen, meaningless to me but speaking volumes to her. Finally, she leaned back, her eyes sharp. "Look at this." She turned the screen toward me. "There were several large transfers in December 2015, just days after your mom's death. Money moved through shell accounts routed overseas, then funneled back into holdings under your dad's company. And in 2017, right after he married Linda, another surge. I felt cold all over my stomach, nodding. So it was true. They had used her death for gain, and then used their marriage to bind the profits. That wasn't all." Sarah clicked to another file. "There were also payments to Detective Miller, the same name Robert had mentioned. A steady flow of money that stopped abruptly after the case was closed." My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the desk. "So Dad paid him off." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like." I pressed my forehead into my palms, my breath shuddering. The man who raised me, who tucked me in at night, who taught me to ride a bike, had also bought silence with blood money. "There's more," Sarah said carefully. "Ethan reached out to me last night. He said he had something for you." I lifted my head, my pulse quickening. "What?" She handed me a flash drive. "He wanted me to give you this if I saw you. He said it was safer this way." My hands trembled as I slid the drive into Sarah's computer. A video file opened. The image was grainy, shaky, clearly filmed from a distance. But the voices were clear. My mom's voice, angry and sharp, filled the room. She was shouting at Dad, demanding to know why he had met with Linda before the divorce was even finalized, accusing him of betrayal. He tried to calm her, his voice rising in frustration. The video cut off abruptly, but the last words were hers, saying she would never forgive him. I sat, frozen, tears burning down my cheeks. My mom knew. She had seen it coming, and now she is gone. Sarah touched my shoulder, her voice steady. "This is proof. Maybe not of the crash itself, but of motive, and motive is powerful." I couldn't breathe. My dad wasn't just guilty of covering up her death. He had been living a lie long before, entwined with Linda even as Mom was still alive. I stood pacing the office, my hands pressed against my chest. My whole body shook with rage, with grief. He destroyed her. And then he buried her truth. Sarah watched me quietly. "What are you going to do?" I wiped my tears, forcing my voice steady. "I'm going to find every piece of evidence, and then I'll decide." On the train back, the city blurred outside the window, but inside me, everything sharpened. Each passenger's reflection in the glass reminded me of masks people wear, the lies they tell. I thought of Dad's booming laugh, Linda's painted smile, Grace's blind trust. I thought of Ethan's eyes on the balcony, steady and urgent. When I returned to the house, I moved carefully. Grace was in the living room, curled up with her laptop, pretending to study. Linda was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped herbs, her back turned but her presence filling every corner. Dad was on the phone in his office, his voice confident, smooth, as if nothing in the world could touch him. I went upstairs, closed my door, and locked it. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and replayed the video, forcing myself to listen again and again. Each word of my mother's voice carved deeper into me. Each shout, each accusation, each moment of her pain became fuel. By the time midnight came, I knew I could never see Dad the same way again. I lay in the dark, my body curled tight, whispering to myself that the truth had found me. The night before I was supposed to meet Ethan again, I could not sit still. I wandered the halls of the mansion with the lights dimmed low, my footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. Every polished surface seemed to carry Linda's reflection, and every painting on the wall felt like it was watching me. My nerves were strung so tightly that even the faint tick of the grandfather clock sounded like a warning. I stopped in front of the portrait of Dad that hung near the staircase, painted just a few years ago. His smile was broad, his shoulders square, his eyes full of pride. But now looking at it all I could see was the lie underneath. His wealth, his confidence, his authority, all of it was soaked in the blood of betrayal. I thought of Mom, of the video I had watched again and again, her voice raised in anger, her pain so clear. She had known he was unfaithful. She had known something was wrong. And then she had died, her car wrapped around a tree on an icy night. I pressed my forehead against the cold frame of the painting, whispering that I would not let her down. In the living room, Grace sat curled up in an armchair, a blanket around her shoulders, a cup of tea warming her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes soft but wary. She had been distant since our last conversation, torn between the comfort Linda offered and the truth I had tried to give her. "You can't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head and sat across from her. "No." She sipped her tea, the steam rising between us. "I keep thinking about what you said, about Mom, about Dad." My chest ached. "Grace," I whispered, "you have to open your eyes. I know it's hard. I know you want to believe in him. But I have proof." Her hands tightened around the cup. "Do you really think he could have done it?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." She looked away, her eyes glistening. Then softly, almost too softly to hear, she said, "I think Linda knows everything." I leaned forward, my pulse racing. "Why do you say that?" Grace's lip trembled. "Because last night after you went upstairs, she came to my room. She told me I should stay out of things I don't understand. That loyalty matters more than truth." My stomach twisted. She had cornered Grace just as she had cornered me. Grace's voice shook. "She scares me, Selena." I took her hand across the space between us, holding it firmly. "I won't let her hurt you." For the first time, I saw trust flicker in Grace's eyes. She nodded faintly, and I knew a part of her was finally breaking free of Linda's hold. The next morning dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds. I dressed quietly, slipping out of the house with the flash drive in my pocket. I was meeting Ethan at Sarah's office, where we could talk without fear of Linda listening. The courthouse loomed across the street from Sarah's building, its stone steps covered in a dusting of snow. News vans lined the curb, cameras pointed at the entrance. Something big was unfolding, though I didn't stop to find out what. My battle was inside. Ethan was already there when I arrived. He stood near the window in Sarah's office, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tense. When he turned and saw me, the hardness in his face softened for just a moment. "You came," he said quietly. "Of course," I replied. "I need answers." Sarah closed the door and gestured for us to sit. Ethan pulled a folder from his coat and slid it across the table. Inside were more documents, financial records, photographs, even emails. Each one was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. "Look at this," Ethan said, pointing to a line on one of the papers. "Money transferred directly to Miller's account the week after your mother's crash. And here Linda's signature on a deed that should not exist yet." My chest tightened as I read. Every line confirmed what I feared. Sarah looked at Ethan, her tone cautious. "Why now?" "Why give her this?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "Because I couldn't stay silent any longer. I knew pieces years ago, but I didn't have enough proof. Now I do. And I owe it to her, to her mother, to bring the truth out." I stared at him, my heart aching with the weight of both gratitude and anger. "You should have told me sooner." He met my gaze steadily. "I know, and I will never forgive myself for waiting." Silence filled the room. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Inside, the truth pressed down on us, heavy and undeniable. Sarah broke the silence. "Selena, we can use this, but you have to be ready. If this comes out, it will not just destroy your dad. It will destroy everything tied to him. His company, his reputation, even Grace's future." I closed my eyes, my hands trembling. I had always dreamed of justice, of exposing the lies. But now the cause stretched out before me, sharp and dangerous. I opened my eyes and whispered, "I don't care. He took my mother from me. He buried the truth. He deserves nothing less." Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing mine, steadying me. "Then we do it together," he said. Sarah nodded, her expression firm. "Then we prepare." That night, back in my room, I replayed the video one more time. My mother's voice echoed her fury and her pain filling the silence. I whispered into the dark that I would carry her, fight for her. Down the hallway, footsteps creaked. They paused outside my door, then moved on. My skin prickled, my breath shallow. I knew they were watching me. Linda, or maybe Dad. But this time I wasn't afraid. The morning of the hearing began with silence so heavy I could barely move. The house was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, and I stood at my bedroom window staring out at the snow-covered lawn. My reflection in the glass startled me. I looked older, worn, as though the truth had carved years onto my face overnight. I dressed slowly, pulling on the navy dress I had chosen the night before, one of the few things that still made me feel steady. My hands trembled as I fastened the buttons. In the mirror, I saw my mother's face in mine, her chin, her dark eyes, the set of her mouth. For the first time in years, I let the resemblance comfort me instead of break me. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen. Linda stood by the counter, her back to me, stirring sugar into a porcelain cup. She turned as I entered, her red lips curved in a smile that never touched her eyes. "You look beautiful," she said, as though she were sending me to prom, not to court. I ignored her and poured myself coffee, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled. Grace appeared in this doorway, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. She wore a black coat, her scarf pulled tight around her neck. She didn't speak, but when our eyes met, I saw the silent question there. Was I really ready to do this? Dad came in last, his suit pressed, his tie straight, his face as confident as ever. He kissed Linda's cheek, patted Grace's shoulder, and clapped me on the back. His voice boomed with cheer. "Big day. Let's show them who we are." My stomach twisted. The courthouse loomed over us an hour later, its stone steps packed with reporters. News vans lined the street, cameras flashing as soon as we stepped from the car. Microphones were thrust in our faces, questions flying, voices rising over each other. "Jonas, did you falsify police reports, Selena? Do you believe your stepmother was involved, Grace? Are you standing with your family or against them?" Dad lifted his chin, his hand on my arm, his smile polished. "No comment," he said smoothly. "No comment." Inside, the air buzzed with tension. The marble floors echoed with footsteps, the high ceilings making every word louder. We were led to a packed courtroom, every bench filled with spectators and press. The judge sat high above, her face stern, her gavel striking once to silence the room. Helen, the attorney Sarah had connected me with, sat beside me at the table. Her presence steadied me, her calm eyes reminding me of why I was here. Sarah was behind us, her notebook open, her pen poised. Ethan sat near the back, his gaze fixed on me, silent strength in his eyes. Across the aisle, Dad and Linda sat with their own team of lawyers. Dad looked relaxed, confident, leaning back in his chair. Linda sat tall, her hands folded neatly, her red nails sharp against the wood of the table. When her eyes met mine, a chill ran through me. The hearing began with opening statements. Helen rose first, her voice steady as she outlined the evidence we had gathered, the contradictions in the reports, the financial trail, the video of my mother's last fight with Dad. She spoke with precision, weaving the facts into a story that could no longer be ignored. Then Dad's lawyer stood, a tall man with a deep voice, and painted us as bitter, grieving women grasping at straws. He claimed the reports were tampered with by outsiders. The financial transfers were business as usual, the video taken out of context. He gestured to Dad, calling him a pillar of the community, a man who had built his company from nothing, a father who had sacrificed for his children. I clenched my hands together, my nails cutting into my palms. When it was time for testimony, my throat tightened. Helen touched my arm and whispered, "You can do this." I walked to the stand, my legs trembling, the eyes of the entire room burning into me. I sat, raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and looked out at the sea of faces. I told them about the text I had received on Christmas night, the warning to leave quietly. I told them about the figure in the driveway, the envelope pressed into my hand, the papers inside. I told them about Sarah helping me trace the money, about Ethan giving me the video, about the way Linda had looked at me across the dinner table and whispered poison into Grace's ears. As I spoke, I saw Grace's face pale further, her lips trembling. I saw Dad's jaw tighten, though his smile never fully slipped. I saw Linda's eyes narrow, her mask cracking for the briefest second. When Helen played the video of my mother's voice, the room went still. Her words rang out raw and angry, accusing Dad of betrayal. Gasps echoed from the benches. My hands shook as I listened again, but I forced myself to stay steady. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. The jury shifted in their seats, their eyes on Dad now with doubt. Then it was his turn. Dad rose from his chair, walking to the stand with the same confidence he carried into every boardroom. His voice was smooth as he swore to tell the truth, his smile polite as he faced the jury. He spoke of his love for my mother, how devastated he had been by her death, how he had done everything to protect Grace and me afterward. He claimed the video showed nothing more than a marital fight, that the financial records were manipulated by enemies jealous of his success. I stared at him, my heart aching with rage. How easily he lied. How easily he twisted the truth. Linda's turn was next. She walked to the stand with elegance, her red heels clicking against the floor. She spoke sweetly, her voice full of practiced warmth. She called me troubled, said grief had clouded my judgment, said she had tried to be a mother to Grace and me, but I had rejected her. She smiled at the jury, her eyes shining with fake tears. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent, my body trembling. By the end of the day, the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The judge called a recess, her gavel striking sharply. We filed out into the hallway, cameras flashing as reporters swarmed. Ethan found me near the stairwell, his hand steady on my shoulder. "You did well," he said softly. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. He still owns the room. He still bends the truth. Ethan's jaw tightened. "For now. But this is not over." Grace appeared then, her eyes wide, her face pale. She looked at me, then at Ethan, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. She whispered, "I don't know what to believe." I touched her arm gently. "Believe what you see, Grace, not what they tell you." She shook her head, tears spilling, and walked away. I stood there, my heart heavy, knowing the hardest part was still to come. The final day of testimony dawned cold and sharp. The kind of winter morning when the sky looked like glass and the air cut straight through your lungs. I rose before the sun, standing at the window of my hotel room, staring at the city stretched out below me. I had not returned to my dad's house after the last hearing. I could not bear the walls, the smell of Linda's perfume clinging to every surface, the way silence echoed after every conversation. Instead, I stayed downtown closer to the courthouse, surrounded by strangers and the comforting anonymity of the city. As I pulled on my coat, I felt the flash drive in the pocket, the weight of my mother's voice stored in it, her words a constant heartbeat. I pressed my hand against it and whispered that I was ready. At the courthouse, the crowd was larger than ever. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, their voices rising like a wave. Cameras flashed in my eyes as I walked up the stone steps with Sarah and Helen. Beside me, Ethan followed close, his tall frame shielding me from the crush of people. Questions flew through the cold air. Did you know about the affair? Do you believe your stepmother plotted your mother's death? Are you seeking control of the company? I kept my head high, ignoring them. Inside, the marble echoed with the footsteps of hundreds of people. The benches in the courtroom were filled, the air tense, every breath hanging heavy. Dad sat across from me, his suit crisp, his tie straight, his smile polished. He looked like he belonged at a board meeting, not a courtroom. Linda was next to him, her red lips curved into the faintest smile, her hands folded neatly on the table. Grace sat behind them, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She looked smaller than ever, as though she were being crushed between two worlds. The judge entered, her gavel striking once. The room stilled. Final arguments began. Helen rose, her voice steady, her presence commanding. She spoke of truth, of betrayal, of the years of silence I had endured. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, the police reports manipulated, the financial records, the payments to Detective Miller. Then she played the video one last time, my mother's voice filling the room, her anger and her heartbreak undeniable. Gasps rippled through the audience. Helen's words cut clean through the air. "This is not an accident," she said. "This is a crime." Then it was the defense's turn. Dad's lawyer rose, his deep voice measured. He painted me as unstable, manipulated by grief, influenced by outsiders who sought to profit from my family's downfall. He gestured toward Dad, calling him a man of integrity, a father who had sacrificed everything. He called Linda a devoted wife who had stepped into a fractured home and given it stability. My chest burned as I listened. Their lies were wrapped in silk, but they were still lies. Finally, the judge called for closing words from each side. Helen placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. "Do you want to speak?" she asked. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, and walked to the center of the courtroom. My voice shook at first, but then it found its strength. I told them about my mother, about her laughter filling the kitchen, about the way she tucked me in at night, about the life stolen from her. I told them about the text on Christmas night, the envelope pressed into my hand, the nights of fear and silence. I told them about my dad's lies, about Linda's poisonous whispers, about Grace caught in the middle of it all. I ended with this. My mother deserved better, and so does the truth. The room was silent when I stepped back to my seat. The jury deliberated for hours. Each tick of the clock echoed in my bones. I sat with Sarah and Helen, my hands clasped so tightly they ached. Ethan sat behind me, his presence steady, a quiet strength I leaned on even without words. Grace sat across the room with Dad and Linda, her eyes darting between us, her hands shaking in her lap. When the jury finally returned, the room held its breath. The foreman stood, his voice clear, guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of bribery, guilty of tampering with evidence. The words rang through the room. Gasps erupted. My chest swelled with a rush of relief and grief so strong I nearly collapsed. Dad's face remained stone, though his jaw clenched. Linda's smile cracked her lips, tightening, her eyes flashing with fury. Grace burst into tears, her sobs filling the silence. The judge's gavel struck. Order! Order! I sat, frozen, tears streaming down my face. After years of silence, the truth had been spoken aloud, carved into the record. My mother's voice had been heard. When the courtroom emptied, I stood outside on the courthouse steps, the cold air sharp in my lungs, the crowd buzzing with questions. Ethan came to my side, his hand brushing mine, his eyes steady. "You did it," he said softly. I shook my head, my voice breaking. "We did it." Grace approached slowly, her face streaked with tears. She looked at me with eyes full of guilt and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't want to believe. I hugged her tightly, holding her as she sobbed. "You're free now," I whispered. "That's what matters." Linda was led past us, her face pale, her eyes dark. She said nothing, but her silence was filled with venom. Dad followed, his head high, still pretending to be unbroken. But I saw it. The cracks in his armor. The man who once seemed larger than life was now just a man caught in his own lies. That night back in my hotel room, I sat by the window watching the snow fall over the city. The lights of Chicago shimmered against the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt my chest loosen. I whispered into the quiet that I had done it for her. For Mom. For the truth. And for myself. Because I was no longer the daughter silenced by fear. I was the woman who had faced the lies and torn them down. If you've stayed with me through this story, tell me what part struck you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like if you believe truth always finds its way. And subscribe if you want more stories where justice, no matter how long delayed, finally arrives.